Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening. What did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was little, I wanted to be a footballer, like pretty much every little lad. I wanted to play for Leeds United and England and win lots of trophies. Sport was a big part of my life growing up. Especially football, but I loved cricket, golf, tennis, anything with a ball really. I was into it. Rugby league as well. Definitely I wanted to be a footballer. And when I realised that I wasn't quite good enough to be a footballer, that's what led me down into a journalism path, because I thought, well, if I can't play football, maybe I can report on football. Maybe I could be a commentator or a sports reporter. So, when I was little, I'd just take in as much football as I possibly could. I would watch it. I used to listen to the radio. Used to drive my family mad, flicking teletext and CFAX on all the time. I can remember one point, my family saying, can we get those football scores off the screen? Because I had these live scores coming up all the time. So, I was, obsessed with sport, and I used to even, when I was little, I'd, do my own little kind of fake commentary of matches, and I'd always be, dreaming of interviewing footballers and all that kind of thing. So, that's it was all about sport for me when I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm. What were you recording on then when you were doing your reporting as a kid? What were you using for that?
I mean, sometimes nothing. Sometimes it was probably just
like
in
a hairbrush,
or it was me, when the, when the TV was on and I'd be messing around. Or sometimes, a friend and I used to, we'd play computer games and I'd kind of commentate along as we're playing. There were times where, I would like record myself on, a little kind of tape player or something like that. So, anything to kind of, I guess it was practicing, wasn't it? Practicing for a future career in, journalism or broadcasting, which, and I've been lucky to do a bit of that during my career.
The reason I ask, because when I was little, we had in the house one of these old reel-to-reel tape recorders. So, and you could record, but, it'd record all the way around the tape one way, and then you could switch it and it'd record going back the other way, so you could use both sides of this tape. And we used to record news programs. There was always like Godzilla attacking Tokyo, or British tourists have died somewhere, and robbing the Bank of England was a popular story as well.
Wow, very imaginative.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 24, and to my guest, James Varley. This is another Squadcast interview recorded on the 9th of July, 2024. Hello, listener. James Varley is the founder and CEO of holiday Cottage Handbook, a multimedia platform dedicated to helping short-term rental investors, hosts, and property managers. Additionally, James owns and manages 2 short-term rental properties. He also runs Varley Media, a communication agency that works with clients across the globe. Previously, James worked in the media, including newspapers, magazines, radio, and TV. For 2 seasons, James worked as a video journalist for Leeds United. From 2013 to 2023, he managed corporate communications for the Qatar 2022 FIFA World Cup organising committee in Doha. Right, let's do this. Episode 134 of Working Hours with James Varley. Yeah, so let's jump straight into what are you doing now then? So what is it that you do now?
Well, I spent the start of my career working in the media.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out working in newspapers. I worked for a golf magazine for a while. I edited a very small little paper or little publication in the Channel Islands for a few years. And then I came back to Leeds and I worked for Leeds United for a couple of seasons as a video journalist for their club TV channel. And then I went out to Qatar and I spent 10 years in Qatar. Most of that time I was working on the World Cup project there and I was managing corporate communications.
Mm-hmm.
So that role ended in June 2023. That's when my contract finished. And now I run a couple of businesses and I've got a couple of properties. So I've got my main business right now is Holiday Cottage Handbook, which is a multimedia channel related to short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
So we share valuable free education with short-term rental investors, hosts and property managers. We've got a number of different channels. We've got our website, podcast, newsletter, free ebook, which you can download from the website. We're also starting to organize a number of events. I also have Varley Media Limited, which is a communications agency. So we work with a few clients across the globe, helping them with their content, their social media, blog posts, speeches, publications, video production, all sorts of different things related to comms.
Mm-hmm.
And also Varley Media is a platform also for my grandfather's photography. So my grandfather worked for the Daily Mirror for 30 odd years and he took some pretty famous photos. He went to 5 World Cups. He was there when England won in 1966. His most famous photo is of Bobby Moore and Pele at the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, the one where they've just swapped shirts. He went to Muhammad Ali fights. He covered royal events. He went to Beatles concerts. He's got an amazing portfolio of photos. He won a World Press Photo Award in 1978 for a photo of Henry Moore, the famous sculptor. John Varley, his name is. And so we've got his photos on the Varley Media website and we license those photos and we sell some merchandise on there of and prints and all this kind of thing as well. And he, bit of a local connection, he covered Leeds United extensively in the 60s and 70s. So in the glory days under Don Revie, he's a lot of the photos that are used by the club today of that time were taken by my granddad. And my uncle is still the official photographer at Leeds now, and he's been there for 30 odd years. So my family are pretty much responsible for Leeds United's photographic archive.
So let's stick with Leeds United for a bit before I move on to other questions. So, I mean, you got to work there as well. You've got that family connection, which you just laid out, and you've got the sort of football dream. Was that the dream job? I mean, was that ultimately like, I'm finally here where I want to be?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when I got that job, I can remember my friends and my family saying, "Oh my God, this is your dream job.
Yeah.
This is amazing." And it was in many respects. And I can remember, especially when I first started, driving into Elland Road every day. I would drive past I lived in Chapel Allerton at that time, and I'd drive past the East Stand and, I'd park in the West Stand. And then, you think of all the history at Elland Road, you'd see the old footage of the players training on the old training ground, which was behind the West Stand. And, you'd see old footage of, new managers, new players arriving in that West Stand car park. I can remember like Brian Clough famously and everybody since Howard Wilkinson and all that kind of thing. So yeah, driving in there every day and actually working at Elland Road, going up to the training ground all the time, attending the games, seeing things behind the scenes. It was great. It was a fantastic experience. And but on the flip side, it goes from being a passion. You're a fan. You arrive as a fan and you love the club and you follow everything, and then it kind of slowly but surely becomes a job
and a business. And yeah.
Yeah. And I remember as a fan, I would absolutely hate the international break. You know, when you stop, you know, you don't have any games over the weekend and you're not really bothered about an England friendly against Macedonia or whoever it might be, and you never really watch it. And it feels like a bit of a waste of a weekend when Leeds are not playing. But when you actually work for the club, having an international break is brilliant because you've got a weekend off. But yeah, it was fantastic to be involved in professional football, to see it a bit from the inside. And for me, it really helped me in my next job, which was working on the World Cup project, because having that insight of professional football and having a bit of experience of what it's like and, you know, the organisation that goes into it, you know, that put me in really good stead. So, yeah, working at Leeds was great in a lot of ways. But I think once I was at the club, I realised that there were a lot of people there who I felt were taken for granted a little bit because they were big fans of the club and they wanted to be there, and they'd accept working in a not a particularly great environment and not going to be earning much money and not going to have much career development because they were just such big fans. And it was, you know, their whole lives revolved around, you know, working for Leeds United, and everybody they meet telling them they work for Leeds United, and probably their friends and family being impressed with the fact that they work there and can give them a bit of inside knowledge of what's going on. So yeah, for me, it was great, fantastic experience, love working for the club. But very quickly I realized that there's not going to be much career development here. I either stay and, you know, I can tell everybody that I work for Leeds, and when I used to say that, people were like, oh wow, that's interesting. Or I'd have to move on to, you know, further my career, and that's what I did.
Just so when you were in media the whole time, but telling people that you're in media gets a certain reaction as well. Did you get a better reaction for the Leeds United or for the working for the BBC and so?
There are two huge ones in my career. It's Leeds United, you know, living in Leeds, obviously at the time, everybody you speak to, everybody you meet has a link to Leeds. Most of them are fans, of course. So that raised eyebrows. But then later on, you know, working for the World Cup is that's on a different stratosphere. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I've had two moments when you say what you do. And yeah, so, you know, especially when I was working in Qatar and I'd come back to the UK, and I'd get all sorts of reactions when I said I was working on the Qatar 2022 World Cup. It's probably the most controversial, consequential, major sporting event of all time. So, you know, especially with the media coverage of it, and how it was portrayed in the UK specifically, yeah, I used to get all sorts of reactions. Some, you know, ranging from very positive to like, you know, wow, that's an amazing role, to literally people just laughing. You know, why are you there? What are you doing over there? That's ridiculous. That's not even going to happen. You know, that'd be the usual thing. Is that still happening? You know, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess those two roles specifically are the ones that generated the biggest reactions.
So there'll be a bunch of people that, like, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on your experience of the World Cup, and, you know, if you haven't already, I'm sure that's got to come. But yeah, but I think we'll probably dip back into it, especially sort of around the COVID question and so on. But if there's anything that you want to say particularly about it, other than that you've said already, I mean, how long did it last? Were you there for the whole duration? What point did you come in? And like, how was the experience outside of how people reacted to it? How was the experience of sort of being there and working on it?
So Qatar won the rights to host the World Cup in December 2010, 2nd of December 2010. I know the exact date. Actually, I know where I was on that date. I was working in the Channel Islands. I was working in a tiny little island called Alderney, which is about 3 miles by 1.5 miles, 3 square miles, tiny place, population of about 2,000. I used to edit the island newspaper. And so I was usually one of the most hated people in the island. But this is a different story. We can move on to that. But I remember that day. So FIFA were announcing 2 World Cup hosts on the same day. They were announcing 2018 and 2022, which became very controversial later on because there were some countries saying, well, if you vote for us in 2018, we'll vote for you in 2022. There was a lot of horse trading and, even more controversy than has already been reported. So since then, there hasn't been kind of two World Cups announced at the same time. But on this particular day, I remember 2018, so England had bid for 2018. So me, as an English football fan, was hoping that England would win the bid for 2018. But of course, I think they got 1 vote in the end. They were nowhere near, even though they'd sent, David Beckham and Prince William and I think Gary Lineker was there as well, representing the bid. And if you remember around that time, England, the UK had a lot of success. We'd got the Olympics, and it seemed like for a time everything that we were bidding for, we were doing very well. So there was kind of an expectation that we'd do quite well here, but it didn't happen. And Russia, of course, got the rights to host 2018. So I remember at the time thinking, being a bit deflated and thinking, oh God, 1 vote, that's rubbish. And then later on, I was watching the BBC Sport website and I saw the ticker, flash up saying that Qatar had won the rights to host 2022. I was like, what? Qatar?
That famous football playing nation.
Where is that? What? How has that happened? Because I remember looking at the countries that had bid for 2022, and I think the other countries that were I think the US were probably the favourites, and also Australia had bid. And I remember thinking at the time, Australia, that would be good because, sports mad nation, they've, improved a lot in terms of football over recent years. They've got great infrastructure there. They've got stadiums. That makes sense. That made sense to me as somebody who wasn't really involved in the bidding process or followed it much. I think the average football fan doesn't really follow a World Cup bidding process. You just kind of at the end, you find out who it is and you're like, great.
Yeah. Where do I have to fly to?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, well, yeah, Australia, that makes sense. And then Qatar came, I was like, wow, that's phenomenal. And then I think I was, Googling where Qatar actually was. But anyway, so I joined I had interviews there in the middle of 2013. I started officially January 2014. And just to give you a bit of background, they won the bid December 2010. They didn't kind of properly launch their local organising committee until later in 2011. And for the first couple of years, there was really a skeleton staff. And then from about 2013, 2014 onwards, that's when they really ramped up recruitment. So the first kind of ramp up of recruitment, that's when I joined. And I was there. I was in Qatar for 10 years. The first 6 months I was there, I was working with an agency, and then I moved over to the World Cup proper. So by the end, I'd worked for the World Cup directly for 9.5 years. And when I joined, no stadiums were ready. There wasn't a metro system. There weren't enough hotels. There weren't highways. So it felt a lot of the time, especially in the early days, it felt like we were a construction company. It felt like we were building a country, not just organising a football tournament. You look in Germany now for the Euros, the infrastructure's already there, all the accommodations there, all the transport infrastructure, stadiums there. You get handed the stadiums. And away you go. You come up with your mascot and you have your lead up events. You organise the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, sort out your branding. It's much simpler when everything is there. For Qatar, it wasn't. There was nothing. We literally built 7 stadiums in the desert and redeveloped one that was already there. And yeah, like I say, in addition to that, building all the things that you need to develop a country, but also
shops,
to
hotels,
host
roads,
a lot of people.
Yeah,
yeah, everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between when I got there in 2013 to when I left in the middle of 2023, it's unrecognizable, really. The everything, just the way, just the entire infrastructure of the country, the facilities, everything that you can do there now. It's it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it kind of puts into perspective when people say, or even myself, when I'm like, oh, Leeds is always bloody changing, and like you've gone somewhere, been there for less than a decade, and an entire city's appeared.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, the city, the stadium that hosted the World Cup final was Lusail Stadium. And this was built in the middle of a brand new city. Lusail just didn't exist when I got there. When I got there, it was an architecture's vision. And, by the end, it's hosting a World Cup final. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, there's an entire podcast in that. I mean, if not more. But yeah, but that's not this podcast. So I'm going to move on to my next question so that you can actually talk about what you're doing now. So, I mean, we've done some of how you got into it, but let's do the story of how the business came about. So why did you make this decision? Why did you make the jump into it? When did you do that? And I mean, was it, I'm trying to think of the words to frame it, but like, was it desire driven by you, or was it something that you kind of fell into, or like, was it a drift, or was it a push into it, I guess?
Oh, I think definitely a push. Yeah. I mean, I think, so in terms of the business that I'm running now, so Holiday, Cottage, Handbook, I started investing in property while I was out in Qatar. And the first property I bought was a regular buy-to-let investment. And then when my daughter was born in 2018, I needed a place to stay in the UK when we were coming back from Qatar. When you've got kids, you're better off having your own space if you can, rather than staying with family. So I wanted to get a property, and I'd used Airbnb for the first time in 2016. I went on holiday to the west coast of the States, and I went to San Francisco, which is actually the birthplace of Airbnb. And I couldn't find a hotel room for under $300 a night. Like, this was the height of summer, so peak time. And even the crummiest looking hotel room was $300 a night. And I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way, than this. Because we'd stayed in LA, we'd stayed in Vegas, and the hotel rooms were all way lower than this. Well, particularly in Vegas. LA was still pretty expensive. And then in the back of my mind, I'd heard of this thing called Airbnb, and I thought, well, let's have a look at that. And I found this little place, which was just a self-contained, like, basement, really, which had been converted by the owners who lived above. If you've seen the film Mrs. Doubtfire, this place was round the corner from where the exteriors of that were filmed. And the house looked exactly like, very similar to where Mrs. Doubtfire's family lived. And yeah, it was a lovely part of town, right next to a park, had everything that we needed, close to really lovely shops and restaurants. The host was great, gave us loads of recommendations. And yeah, it was just a really cute place. And I think that was about $180 a night. So nearly half the price of the worst hotel in the city. And when I stayed there, I just thought, well, God, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do something similar to this. And this is a much better way to travel. You've got your own space. It's cheaper. You're engaging with a host who's giving you local recommendations. You don't have that, you don't have that hotel experience where maybe you've got everything there on tap, but you're getting a much more personalized travel experience. I thought, well, maybe I can do something like this. And also, if I have a place which is an Airbnb or a short-term rental, I can actually block it out when I need to use it and use it myself. If I own a buy-to-let property, I can't kick the tenants out, a few times a year when I want to come back. So I thought, right, okay, well, my next project is going to be to get a short-term rental. So I did that after my daughter was born. And so I bought my first one in 2019. And then a few years later, the price of the property had gone up. So I managed to remortgage, take some money out and buy another one. So I've got a couple of short-term rentals now. And what I noticed though, the big thing that I noticed was the education gap between buy-to-let investing and short-term rental investing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was investing in buy-to-lets, when I was doing my research, I found a lot of podcasts, newsletters, websites, forums. Everything was there. It was at your fingertips. There were a lot of events. Everything you needed to know, you could do a quick Google search and you'd find everything you wanted. But with short-term rentals, there was really nothing. It was a bit of a barren landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to listen to a property podcast. It's called the Property Podcast, and it's organised by a company called Property Hub. Great company. They've been going, I think, since about 2012, 2013. And they've produced a lot of free resources. They have a forum. They even have a magazine. I think in recent years, they've developed this investment vehicle for people to invest with them in buy-to-lets. And when I switched to short-term rentals, I thought, well, where's my property hub for short-term rentals? And it just didn't exist. So for a while I was still working on the World Cup, I just had this idea in the back of my mind, maybe I can build a platform for short-term rental hosts and property managers, because clearly there's a lot of people out there who are getting involved in this now. They want to know what's going on in the industry. They want to become better hosts and property managers. And I could see this on Facebook, because a lot of people who were in this space were in Facebook groups, and that's where they were getting their information and education from. That's where the community was. And what I saw all the time was every day people joining saying, hi, I'm new to this, but I don't know where to start. I don't know. Should I be allowing pets? How much should I charge? Should I charge a cleaning fee? And I just see these elementary questions every single day. And I thought to myself, well, maybe if I can produce a platform which is going to answer these questions and help people, then if I can then build that audience, build that ecosystem, then that becomes a very valuable audience for people in the industry, companies in the industry that want to leverage it. And the way I think I can do that is by having valuable content, valuable free education, actionable content, which is going to help people get better and like I say, build this community. So that was the vision behind it. And after the World Cup finished in December 2022, I still had 6 months to go on my contract, but not a lot of work to do because the tournament had finished. So I had time to kind of work on other projects and think about what I was going to do next. And I'd applied for a few jobs here and there, and I was having conversations with companies about, working with them on maybe on a consultancy basis. And I even had a couple of conversations about, maybe I could work with FIFA in Switzerland, or maybe I'll go and work on the next tournament in 2026, which is in the States and Canada and Mexico. But all that time, there was this thing nagging at me saying, this idea might be a goer, try and do this. And also I had there was this bit inside me. I'd always wanted to properly run my own business, to start something up, to be my own boss. And that in the end, that kind of took over, the thinking that A, the business can work, and B, I want to do something on my own. I've been in Qatar for 10 years now. And I have that foundation. I can do this by myself. I can build a business. I've got a little bit of money in the bank, so I can take this risk really. And that's what convinced me to do it. And so in early 2023, after the World Cup had finished, I started writing an ebook. This is why the company is called Holiday Cottage Handbook, because that's how it started life, as me writing an ebook based on my own experience, based on, this is what you need to do when you're buying and sourcing a property. This is what you need to do when you set it up. These are the tech solutions that can help you. This is what you need to know about mortgages and insurance, Wi-Fi and photography and all these things. So wrote the ebook. And then in the middle of the year, so I finished my contract. I'd written the ebook just about. And then I went on holiday for a few weeks. We went to the Far East. My wife's from the Philippines, so we were seeing family over there. And when I got back, I was like, right, okay, now I'm going to go full throttle and try and launch this business. And at the start, I had a brand, and I had a PowerPoint presentation, and I had an idea, and all I did was spend most of July and August 2023 on LinkedIn, finding people who were in the industry, connecting with them, sending them messages saying, this is what I'm doing. Here's my presentation. Can we have a chat? Will you come on my podcast? And that's how I built things up to the point where in September last year, that's when all the channels were launched. But yeah, for a few months, it was just trying to become part of this industry, part of the short-term rentals industry, speak to people, gauge what they thought about the idea. Some people thought it was fantastic. Some people were, the reaction generally was pretty positive. A lot of people like, we really need this kind of platform. It's going to be very valuable for house and property managers. Yeah, love to come on your podcast, love to be involved. Other people were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Some people didn't really get it. Other people thought I was bonkers, and have told me now that they thought I was bonkers, but a few months later now they're like, actually, I can see what you're doing now. I thought you were bonkers at the time, but yeah, I think this could work. So yeah, that's how it got started, and it was very much me. I think I wanted to run my own business. B, I wanted a bit of a change, and I'd been passionate about property for a while, and that's what led me down this route. And I guess, yeah, I wanted to see if I could do it on my own.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking there, like the way that you've told that story, I'm imagining, like, it sounds a very journalistic approach, that of like, tracking people down and searching and going through stuff. Are you quite a heavily phone-based worker? Do you like, not just for the media, but like ringing people? Are you very much like ring and speak to people, and that is your kind of main tool? Or are you more, I'm online and it's all about the sort of more comprehensive media strategy?
A bit of both, but I mean, when I started out in the newspapers, this is when you had to learn very, very quickly how to be good over the phone. A lot of journalism was done interviewing people on the phone. You had to phone up in the morning, find out what's going on with the police, with the fire, with everything. And yeah, I guess, when I started in 2005, it was that we were just switching. We were in the middle of this huge switch from, I guess, analog to completely digital and social media world. I think when I started, maybe I can't remember, when did Facebook start? I can't remember what.
It's like 2007 or something. It's much later than you think, sort of thing. Yeah.
So we had, back then we had the internet.
Yeah.
We had websites, but a lot of the websites weren't great. They didn't have much. There wasn't much information. We didn't have the wealth of information that we have now.
We had early days of YouTube and stuff, like really early days of all the Web 2.0 stuff. Like everything got faster, and then they started putting more flash on stuff and animating websites. But yeah, none of how we imagine
exactly.
It now.
But I remember when I started in journalism, and my big thinking at that time was, people are starting to blog. And I kind of put two and two together, and I think I did come up with four at that time, which was, everybody's becoming a journalist because everybody's telling the story of their own lives. And this is what's going to happen in the future. It's not going to be newspaper reporters finding out stories and telling people what's going on. It's going to be everybody else telling the journalists what's going on online. And this is kind of what I could see. And I remember starting out in the local newspapers. My first job was at the Pontefract and Castleford Express in 2005. And we had this, in that year, we had this big presentation about, what the future's going to look like and how it's going to be digital and all that kind of thing. And I just remember thinking, you're just miles behind. You're just going to get completely left behind by what's happening. Even, and I was, how old was I? 20, nearly 21. And it just felt like then they just couldn't comprehend what was going to happen in terms of the internet and the fact that it was going to take over people's lives and that everybody else was going to become a reporter. As newspapers, we had to adapt to that. Going back to what you asked me about being on the phone, I guess, what I've learned with the business is that where I've been most valuable is when I've had the opportunity to talk to people, and having those initial chats over Zoom usually, or Google Meet or Teams or whatever it might be. They're so important. But added to that is the podcast itself. That for me has been a huge driver for the business, not because I'm getting millions of downloads, but because of the people that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
Because generally the people that I'm speaking to are the CEOs or the founders, or they're high-ranking people at the business, the decision makers, basically. And if I get an hour with that person and I talk to them about their career, the company that they work for, the solutions they provide, tips that they can share, trends that they can share about that's going on in the industry, that is incredibly valuable. Because then at the end, I can say, hey, we should work together. My platform's talking to hosts and property managers. How can we collaborate more? How can we strike up a partnership? How can we help you with your content? How can we help you reach the people that you want to reach? And it's that 5-10 minutes at the end of the podcast that has helped me generate, business and revenue for the company. So having those actual face-to-face conversations, they might not be literally face-to-face. It might be like we're talking now over, over the podcast recording platform. But yeah, it's so incredibly valuable. And I think adding on from that, I've been to various industry events now, and then you do meet people face-to-face. I've had so many video calls with people, and then when you do meet them face-to-face, there's already a connection there, and you can go, one step further. So yeah, I think picking up the phone, and so many people these days are allergic to picking up the phone. When I was working over in Qatar, I had a team of, by the time of the tournament, there's like 12 or 15 of us. I was managing that team, and especially the younger ones, they don't want to pick up the phone.
No.
They want to do everything either over email, and I'll say, so-and-so got back to you. Oh, they didn't reply over email.
Ring them up.
Okay, I know. Oh, I've tried them over WhatsApp as well. They haven't read it. I'm like, and give them a call. Get on the phone. And yeah, it's something that we've seen. It's been a quick shift, hasn't it, over the last 10, 15 years or so, that we've there's a bit of an allergy to picking up the phone, but it's so important. And added to that, meeting people as well, getting that face-to-face time, and having that, building those personal relationships in any business is so important. And that's why a lot of the time I take the time to try and really focus on those meetings and make sure that I'm doing enough. Call it business development now, having those business development chats, trying to grow the business rather than spending all my time creating content, writing things, doing social media. But I'm like, yes, that's all really important because I've got to keep up the consistency. I've got to keep the audience engaged, but I've got to do the business development, growing the business stuff, because that's kind of where I'm most valuable, and that's where we can, get the most bang for our buck.
I think it's a key point worth underlining. I mean, I get it. I hate being on the phone. I don't want to be but I've done phone jobs. I've done telesales. I've worked in call centers. So I can do it. I'm not very happy with it, but yeah, you do need to kind of make yourself do it. And it's very easy to, especially when you're your own boss, you can kind of be like, well, I don't have to do that. Okay. But yeah, I think it's still an incredible, it's like they always say, you read stuff online, they'll always talk about how powerful emailing is, and it's still your best marketing tool. And to a degree, that's true. But also, everyone gets loads of emails, and you do read some of them and you do engage with some of it, but most of it goes in the trash. I heard someone speaking on, I can't remember who it was, but on Phil's podcast, Leeds Business Podcast, and saying they wrote handwritten letters because people open them, because nobody gets handwritten letters anymore. It's like how to stand now. But the phone, if you can get hold of people and speak to them directly and they've got time for you. And And if you get someone the right way, because, from sales experience, someone can start off very like, I've got no time for this. Who are you? Go away. And then within a couple of sentences, they're like, oh. And they've suddenly got all the time in the world for you. It depends whether they're interested in what you are offering, I guess, for want of a better term.
Yeah, 100%. And I've also noticed this with, like, because I've got a couple of short-term rentals as well, like I said, and there are some guests that we welcome who often they might be a little bit older, but they really appreciate talking on the phone. They really appreciate like knowing who the host is, and if there's an issue, I'll give them a call or whatever it is. So it can go a really long way to growing your business. And yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of calling people.
Yeah, because they don't have to pick up, and I mean, I remember a point in time. I don't know if this will register with you, but I remember a point in time of like everyone acquiring mobile phones. And initially, answer phones were sort of something that you were like, oh, God, an answer phone. I don't know what to do with this. And then it got to the point where everyone had mobiles where you were like, oh, God, don't pick up. Please be the answer phone. So you didn't have to speak to someone. You could just give them the message.
Yeah, I mean, texting just changed everything, didn't it? Texting was, when that became possible, that just completely changed the landscape in terms of communication. And now, like, going back to the World Cup, I mean, a lot of people would tell you the World Cup was basically delivered over WhatsApp. That's how we communicated, and we'd have, we used to make a joke, when somebody created a new WhatsApp group because we had a social media competition, or we'd have a channel launch, or like a new project we were working on, or a stadium launch, or the emblem launch, and we're creating these new WhatsApp groups all the time. By the end of it, especially those of us who were working in comms, we were part of so many WhatsApp groups, and it was tiring. But yeah, that was the way that we communicated. Really, it was over WhatsApp, and it was relentless, absolutely relentless all the time. Ping, 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 every second of every day. Sometimes you'd wake up to hundreds of WhatsApp messages.
Well, yeah. I mean, your audience there is, billions? Like the people that are, like in terms of the engagement and people that watch and so on. Like we're talking billions of people here, and like maybe they're not all clicking on stuff, but out of that huge cohort, that's a few notifications you're going to get every second.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the biggest sporting event in the world.
Unquestionably.
Bottom line. Yeah.
I mean, did you have to have about 5 phones, one for each WhatsApp group?
Yeah, maybe that would have helped.
Okay, let's crack on with some questions. So I'm going to start us off with COVID. So there's 2 main parts that I want to look at here. So the experience going into the lockdown, and then sort of the experience coming out. So how did your work change going into lockdown, and how did it change coming out the other side?
So I was in Qatar working on the World Cup project at the time, and going into it, Qatar was fairly quick to lock down, quicker than over here in the UK. I remember Qatar pretty quickly bringing in all sorts of regulations that people had to adhere to in terms of, social distancing and mask wearing and working from home and all that kind of thing. And at the time, looking at what was going on in the UK and thinking, what is happening over there? Boris Johnson's going around shaking hands with people in hospitals, and you're like, what is going on in my own country? And feeling pretty glad at the time that I was in Qatar and not in the UK. But in terms of work practices, so yeah, we were working from home pretty much straight away, and we'd actually been working on a tournament. So we were supposed to have a tournament. I think it was in the May of 2020, and maybe it was March. It was either March or May of the 2020. I think it was March, actually, thinking about it now. And it was going to be during the international break. And I think 4 teams were supposed to come over. And I remember one of them was Portugal. So we were working on, it was kind of like a mini test event. They were going to play a few matches at some World Cup stadiums. we're trying to get fans across. We're having sponsors. We're having all sorts of, chat about how this is going to work. And then, of course, the pandemic comes along, and for ages we were just waiting for a decision to be made because nobody expected this little mini tournament to happen because lockdowns are coming in, everything's been cancelled all over the world, all sporting events are, being thrown in the bin. And we just thought, well, we're just waiting for the announcement. And eventually the announcement came. So that was the first thing. But it felt like we'd had a lot of wasted work because I'm thinking, well, I'm drafting this press release, or I'm drafting these social posts about this tournament, knowing 99% is not going to happen. So I remember that. And then we were also, so I think that tournament was supposed to launch one of our stadiums. So it was called Education City Stadium, which is at Qatar Foundation. It's the one that kind of looks like like a diamond exterior. And fun fact, I was the one who kind of coined diamond in the desert. That's what we kind of nicknamed that stadium. That was mine. And so we were supposed to inaugurate that stadium. And again, that was it. Well, are we still going to inaugurate this stadium? Like, we don't have a match anymore. Nobody can go anymore. So what are we going to do? And we had so many meetings about how we can still leverage this. We ended up having a digital launch. I think we had like a socially distanced orchestra in the middle of the pitch. We did stuff online. We had people phoning in. We'd had all sorts of chats as well with like major like UNICEF and the World Health Organization about how we can involve them and raise money. A few of those things didn't come to fruition, but we ended up having a digital launch. And it was, to be honest, it was so hard. It was so hard to kind of, because we weren't all working in an office. You can't just go around the corner and have those conversations. Yeah. We're trying to do everything over MS Teams. Everything was trying to done over Teams. I remember like very quickly the entire organization switched to Teams. And yeah, it was just hard work. And then a few months after, there'd been rumors about they're going to have to, because the government in Qatar said, government bodies need to cut their budgets by 30%, I think it was. So, but they could only cut 30% from the expat workforce, not from the Qatari workforce. This is kind of how things work in Qatar. Qatari workers are completely protected, and it's they're going to cut from the expat workforce. So we then had that to deal with, which was very difficult. There were some redundancies. Some people, including myself, we had to take a pay cut for a while, which went on longer than we anticipated. So yeah, it was, with the uncertainty, with trying to work over Teams all the time, it was just a real challenge. And then you throw in,
it sounds like a nightmare.
We're going to cut your salary. Yeah, it was the worst time. It was actually the worst.
Yeah, and you're essentially like actual dream job, kind of, but you're working for the World Cup, and it's like, this is not what I want. Like, because as well, it's like, is it even going to happen? I mean, how far into the lockdown were you like, is this even going to go ahead? Like, are they going to stop this? Like, are we definitely, it must have been so hard to kind of like motivate yourself and like, why am I here? What's going on? But then, your options of visiting, I guess, are kind of limited of like, well, can I fly? Can I go anywhere? Well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the tournament, I remember from quite early on, we thought we're just about going to get away with it because our tournament had been shifted back a little bit anyway to November and December 2022. Mm-hmm. And we thought by then things should be okay. Mm-hmm. And that was proven to be correct. Thankfully, we had full stadiums. We didn't have any COVID restrictions during the tournament. But yeah, of course, I mean, there was, everybody knows, there was so much uncertainty about everything. I think, when it first started, I remember, everybody's thinking, well, hopefully it'll be a few months and we'll have a lockdown and it'll be all right. And I remember fairly early on, we were getting these media reports saying, this is going to last years. This is literally going to be years. because if we look at the evidence, if we look at historic pandemics, they don't just go away.
Yeah.
You know,
You can't just hide from it for a few weeks.
No, exactly. And I think that was a big shock to a lot of people, because obviously nobody's lived through a pandemic before. And the uncertainty was huge. And I can remember I did manage to get backwards and forwards to the UK when I could. You know, it was, and I got the COVID vaccine quite early. They were pretty quick in Qatar. They got the vaccines in, and you know, because I was working on the World Cup project, you're one of the priority workers, so you get the vaccine pretty quickly. So that helped with travel and stuff. But yeah, incredibly difficult. You know, when people ask me now, you know, what was the most difficult time working on the World Cup project? 100% it was lockdown. It was COVID. Yeah. For all those reasons that I mentioned.
Yeah, because well, I won't go into it. I've said a million things about this a million times, but so coming out the other side, I mean, obviously you're a media professional. You're used to working remotely, online, at distance, using basically all the social media tools and kit and so on. So that kind of remote working was not really sort of something new or a change for you. But I suppose having to do it every day is a change, maybe, or like never seeing an office is kind of a change. Like, had you? I mean, well, maybe I'll let you put it how you want to put it. Yeah. What's the experience coming out? Do you think anything's changed for you permanently in the ways that you work?
I think the most positive thing to come out of COVID is the approach to remote working. You know, I can remember, you know, starting my career in journalism, and often I'd think, why are we all in this dingy office in Castleford all the time?
Yeah.
We don't need to be here. You know, we have the technology to be able to do this job from anywhere. And the one thing that I would always think is, why are we commuting all the time? We're spending all this time commuting. We are wasting all this energy. We're
and money.
The planet.
And you know, the cost for it, the carbon.
That's a great point, because like when I was working in Hull for a while and living in Leeds, and I was driving to Hull every day, and my biggest expense by far was fuel. Yeah. You know, my car cost me a fortune. And when I moved to the Channel Islands, my pay went up a bit, but the money that I had in my pocket at the end of every month was much higher because I didn't have to own a car. Yeah. You know,
just shout out the window to the office.
Exactly. So I think now the attitude to remote work, I think is great. And, you know, being in the industry that I'm in the media, I really don't, you know, the people that I work with, I work with a podcast editor who's in Spain. I work with somebody else who's, she's based in London most of the time, but she's South African. Work with another guy who actually, you know, lives fairly close to me. I've known him for years. But a lot of my clients and sponsors for Holiday Cottage Handbook, they're based in the States, they're based in Australia, they're based all in Greece, in all over the world. So, I think the approach to remote working has definitely been, you know, for me, the biggest positive that's come out of the pandemic. It's opened people's eyes to what's possible. Of course, that comes with challenges as well. I mean, one thing I've noticed since I came back from the UK, a few times I've gone into Leeds for meetings during the day, and it struck me how quiet the city centre is during the week now. And I can remember, I think I went in for a meeting at about 3 or 4 o'clock one day, and it was at a business right next to the train station. And when I left, I was thinking, oh gosh, it's going to be rush hour. And I was kind of looking around thinking, is this rush hour? It's like, this is just like, there's hardly anybody here. Yeah. So of course it brings challenges as well, you know, economically for those businesses in the city centre that are used to huge footfall every day. They're just not getting it anymore because a lot of office workers are coming in a couple of days a week, 1 day a week. And even then, you know, I think we're kind of at this stage where a lot of people, they go to the office not because they really have to, but maybe it's like, well, I like a change of scenery.
Yeah.
Or, I'm just, I want to go on the train one day.
Yeah.
It's kind of become a little bit light. It feels to me like it has.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think remote working, fantastic. I think it's better in terms of, especially like when you're bringing up a family, in terms of the environment. But of course, there is an economic payoff to it as well. And yeah, I guess, a challenge, I think, for this new government and future ones is going to be, well, how do we help those businesses that are based in the city centres and, make sure that remote working doesn't, kill off other parts of the economy. It's definitely a challenge. It's a bit of a balancing act.
So let's do Brexit. Hopefully this won't take, I think this will be quick because I don't think it's really going to have affected you at all. But yeah, the question is, has Brexit affected the way that you work? Has it impacted the business at all in any way that you can see? I mean, I would hope, ideally, it's going to be good for your business. And that, you're ideally seeing an increase in people doing staycations, as we call them now, but like sort of holidaying in the UK, because that's your industry. So have you seen any bump from it, maybe? I don't know. It's really hard to tell, isn't it? Because we had a lockdown, then we had mad inflation and...
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the short-term rentals industry, the biggest impact was COVID, because during COVID, a lot of people staycationed in the UK. So, so many people were looking at options of staying here because they couldn't go abroad. We had a lot of people who bought holiday rental properties or second homes and then started running them as short-term rentals. So if you look at the figures in 2021, 2022, they're kind of regarded as real boom years for short-term rentals. And they actually delivered growth, which wasn't sustainable. I think a lot of people who bought a property, bought an investment, or maybe they bought it as a holiday home and started renting it out on the side, they couldn't believe the returns that they were getting because staycations were all the rage. And it's only now that things have kind of returned to normal. The year since then, 2023, and this year, comparative to the post-COVID, look kind of anemic. But if you compare them to pre-COVID, it just shows kind of a normal level of growth. So yeah, the pandemic had a big impact. In terms of Brexit, I mean, it's difficult for me to say. I was obviously living in Qatar when the Brexit vote happened. My business, I only set it up last year. I don't think there's a major impact in terms of Brexit. I mean, from a personal point of view, I hate Brexit. I think it was a ridiculous decision. I think a lot of it was turkeys voting for Christmas. I think there was a lot of misinformation out there. I think the people who voted it were basically sold lies by a lot of the campaigners who would never actually have to deliver it. It's very easy to shout and scream different policies if you're never going to be responsible for actually implementing them. And I think we saw a lot of that during Brexit. And to have a decision about such a fundamental part of our country and our economy to be a simple yes/no vote, when this is an incredibly nuanced issue.
With such a tiny margin as well, such a tiny margin. Like, I mean, remember the independence referendum for Scotland, it had to be like 60-40 or something. There was like a set minimum to clear, because that's not even statistically significant, is it? 1%.
The thing is that it's such a complicated and nuanced issue that to have a yes/no vote, I think in the first place, is just ridiculous. Because what does yes and what... I mean, yes obviously was, or, what do we say? Remain is the status quo. We stay as we are. What does leave actually mean? Does leave mean we just stop trading with Europe altogether? Does leave mean that we consider the EU as pariahs from now on? For example, a thing that's kind of caught my attention recently, obviously we just had the general election campaign. People talk about trade deals and they talk about, we're going to do a trade deal with the US. We're going to do a trade deal with Australia. We're going to do a trade deal with companies in the Pacific. And everybody says this is going to be better for our economy.
I know what you're going to say here.
It's going to make us richer. And everybody's like, yeah, of course, let's do it with Europe. Yeah, let's do it with America. Let's do it with Australia. Let's do it with the Pacific. And then somebody comes along and says, well, should we do a trade deal with the EU? Oh, no, don't do it with the EU. What? It's going to be better for our economy. Oh, no, I'm not sure about that. It's our closest trading partner. Nah. Better to do that Pacific one, which is going to be 0.3% of our trade, rather than do it with our closest. It's kind of like the EU has become a pariah because we had this Brexit vote and everybody's scared to talk about it and everybody's scared to say that we should do anything close with the EU anymore. It's just mental to me. And the, the freedom of movement and what I loved previously, when I was back in Qatar and I was thinking about what I was going to do next pre-Brexit, I could look at jobs anywhere in Europe because I had the right to work anywhere in Europe. I had the right to live anywhere in Europe. And now you don't.
Yeah.
And I think for the young people of this country, and for everybody in the country, not just the young people, it's just an incredible act of self-harm. And I hope the new government look closely at having a closer relationship with Europe and edging towards to what we had before and all those things that we gave away rather stupidly, if you ask me.
Just for the audio, I'm nodding along here, but I'm not going to expand on this point either. So I am going to move us into, we'll do climate change and then we'll get, because I think we're going to spend more time on social media. So, with regards to climate change, is there anything that you can do in your work to kind of promote adaptation, mitigation, awareness raising, or is it something that you feature within your work or within your design, or is it not something that you think about with relation to work?
Yeah, we think about it a lot. I mean, in terms of running short-term rentals, so we work with a few different companies in this space who are promoting environmental and green issues, helping host and property managers to make sure that their rentals are as environmentally and as eco-friendly as possible. So we've had a few people on our podcast. There's actually a company called Enviro Rental, which is in the short-term rental space, and it's a platform of free resources, a little bit similar to what I do, but it's all about teaching hosts and property managers how, if you take eco-friendly steps, you can appeal to more guests. You can obviously reduce your carbon footprint, and
save
eventually
on costs.
you can save on costs and make more revenue. So all these things make sense. It's about telling that story of why not only it's important for the planet, but also it's going to help your business in the long run as well. There's another company that we work with called Sustonica. So they're a grading system. They're the first official grading system for short-term rentals, and they grade the sustainability of your rental. And if you meet a minimum criteria, you get a badge, which you can put on your direct booking website, and it will give you kind of priority searches. Like Booking.com have a sustainability search. So if you want to search for a property which is more eco-friendly, this badge will kind of confirm that your property is meeting certain criteria. And then they have this kind of like annual thing as well, where they continually do audits of your property and encourage you to like increase your eco-friendliness by about 2% a year. These are the things you can do to continually improve. You're doing like a baseline now, and if you install double glazing, or if you start using different cleaning materials or whatever it might be, if you install solar panels, you're going to get to the next level, and it becomes even more eco-friendly. So yeah, we do a lot in terms of sharing with that audience. We did so many, going back to Qatar 2022, we did a lot of sustainability related stories. For example, we had stadiums where we used a lot of recycled materials in the stadiums. We had one stadium where it was called Stadium 974, and it's the first demountable stadium in World Cup history. So it's made from shipping containers, and if you want, you can completely pick up this stadium and put it somewhere else. There was actually a rumor that it was going to be picked up and taken to America for 2026. I don't think that it's not going to happen now. I think some people in Qatar decided that they like the stadium too much. but that shows you the potential of it. It's made from shipping containers, it was made from a lot of recyclable materials, and it has that potential, because what they're saying is, like, with a major sporting event in some countries, they build all this infrastructure, they might not necessarily need it for the long term. So how can you make sure that infrastructure can be used in the future? Okay, we can maybe take it somewhere else for another sporting event or another cultural event that might need it in future. So yeah, we did so many sustainability stories for that. And yes, it's definitely a big part of myself running my own short-term rentals, but also helping our audience of hosts and property managers to make sure that their properties are as eco-friendly as possible.
I mean, we've touched on it throughout the discussion anyway. Sort of, my question on social media is about the return on investment. So having the experience and the background that you have, do you know how to get what you want out of it, or do you still find it kind of frustrating? Like, how much time do you put into it, and does it give you the return on investment of that time that you want? Now, we've already kind of discussed the use of the phone and like the primacy of sort of, the importance of actually connecting with someone, starting to build that relationship rather than just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping people vibe with it, I guess. So yeah, so what's your experience and what's your approach with the business? I mean, was it always, it kind of happened by accident with the handbook, but there must have been an intent behind the handbook. I mean, you were trying to kind of distill and aggregate the information, put it into a useful format for people that they could access. So was it always very social media strategy driven in terms of when you conceptualize the business? Obviously, there's a real world physical element to it as well, because it's property. So yeah. What's your take on it, and what's your experience with social media, how it relates to the business and your work now?
It's a massive part of growing an audience. So we exist to develop an ecosystem. Really, that's what we're aiming to do. We need to have a ecosystem of engaged hosts and property managers and investors and people that are aspiring investors that want to get involved in this space. And our entire business is built on sharing high quality, valuable, educational and actionable content. So high quality content is at the heart of everything we do. And how do we drive people to that? A big part of it is social media. And I think the main thing that I've learned is the value of consistency. Just cannot be understated. Turning up every day, you never know which post is going to cut through to the right person. And sometimes it will be the blandest, most mundane link which the right person finds. The right person, and I mean the right person, is somebody who is perhaps working for a potential customer, a potential advertiser, who sees it, who gets through to your website, who then finds a podcast, and then it's like a domino effect, and then they contact you and say, let's have a chat about working together. So turning up every day is so important, being consistent. We all know, anybody who works in the media and social media, we know that social media platforms reward accounts that post consistently and post regularly. That's the most basic thing you can do. It's just post every single day, even if it's very simple. One link, keep things ticking over, keep things going, keep things growing. And when you're in a business like mine, it's all about numbers. It becomes, yes, it's based on content, but it really does become quite a mathematical game when you look at it. If I get more people following me, if I get more people engaging, if I get more email subscribers, more podcast listeners, it becomes a more valuable platform. Because then I can put all those numbers, can tally them up, I can put them in the next presentation, I can send them to potential customers, and it every day, every week, every month, every year, it becomes more valuable and becomes a platform that more customers want to get involved in. So social media is a huge part of that. It's, of course, it's a constant challenge, because on the one hand, you want it always to be great content. You want it to be engaging. You want to get loads of likes and comments and follows on the back of it. And then it's also, you've got to think about which platforms you're going to prioritize, because sometimes you're trying to do every single platform and it doesn't necessarily work, and it's better to maybe concentrate on one or two platforms and do them really well than try and do 5 of them not particularly well. So there's always that battle. But I think it's just about the consistency is so important, turning up every day, and that doesn't just apply to social media. That applies to everything, I think, across the board in the business. Turning up every day, get to the end of the day. What have I done today to grow my business? Came back to that question that I mentioned at the start. What have I done today? Have I sent some emails? Have I had some calls? Have I moved things forward? Has an advertiser come on board? Have I had a few extra follows on LinkedIn, on Instagram? Have some people liked my story and my tweet? What we're doing on Facebook? We've posted in some Facebook groups. Are we getting some engagement? All that kind of thing. Are we continually kind of nudging the needle a tiny, tiny little bit each day? And that's kind of what it boils down to me. Are we adding more subscribers? Are we adding more podcast listeners? And if we are, then we're going in the right direction. And I've spoken to a few other businesses who've done similar things to me before. And one thing they said is, yes, you've got to be consistent. You've kind of got to just let things grow in the background. If you're consistent, if you do the right things and you do the simple things well, the growth, the engagement, it will take care of itself. It will get there. You will get to where you want to be. But yeah, being disciplined, turning up every day, being consistent, they are really the things that I value so highly.
I mean, in terms of your production for posts for yourself, how much time would you give some of that? Say like you're doing a video post or something. Are you scheduling everything in advance, and or are you keeping certain content? I mean, if you feel like you're giving away secrets or whatever, you don't have to share. But like, I'm thinking, like there must be a level at which, right? Okay, I'm going to put this much production and time and effort into this post or this post, and then other ones where you're just like, that's just an image, that's just a comment, that's like, throw it out there. Is that based on the time that you have available to you, or do you block out time where you're like, right, I really need to focus on this? Do you focus more on the strategy end or on the production end? Like, how do you kind of or do you just vary it depending on the situation or depending on whims? Like, what's your approach on that?
I like to take quite a analytical approach. I like to look and see.
You're seeing what people have responded to.
Yeah. And I try to then create things accordingly.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what's served us best. Sometimes it's luck.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's right place, right time. Occasionally, maybe you'll respond to a comment or you'll post something and it will just fly.
Yeah.
And it can be because the right person liked it, the right person shared it, the right person commented on it, and that brings in a lot of other people viewing it. I mean, we posted a video on, it was a short excerpt from our latest podcast, which I posted last week. And this is where, like, I want to do a lot more, is like these video shorts across social media, kind of previewing our next podcast episode. We started doing a few, for a few various reasons. We didn't do them for a while. It boiled down to time, the editor not having the time, me not having the time. And now we've got a new editor and we're bringing this back again. And it's the first time we've done it in a while last week. And it just flew. It absolutely flew. We put it on LinkedIn to begin with, and it's got way more likes than our average post. I think now it's not far off 100 likes now. And people engaging with that content because it's bite-sized. He's saying stuff that's interesting. It's relatable to our audience. It's engaging. And, now it's like, well, I knew this stuff was going to work. I knew this is the kind of thing we should be doing, but this is just like the proof of it. In terms of the time, I try to block time every morning to work on the socials across our channels, because we have different content coming out all the time. So we have our main weekly newsletter comes out on a Tuesday. So on a Monday, I'm previewing the newsletter. I'm asking people to sign up. On Tuesdays, after I've spoken to you, I'm going to be talking about what's in the newsletter this week. Then Wednesday, our main weekly podcast comes out on a Friday. Wednesday, we start previewing this week's podcast. Thursday, again, we have another push for the podcast that's coming out on Friday. Friday, we have a newsletter about the podcast. The podcast really is our hero content. A lot of the stories that are in the newsletter, I'll break them up and put them up as blog posts on the website. So we start talking about those across social media. If there's a story or a blog post which makes a really good question on social media, for example, the video that I mentioned that went really well, which was a guy who's the CEO of a big property management business across Europe. I asked him what the best amenities were for short-term rentals, and he said, hot tub, be pet friendly, and install an EV charger. These are the things that are going to help your property to stand out. And it was like a simple 1-minute video. And that's a great question on social media. This guy says these are the top 3 things. Have you got them at your property? Or this guy says these are the top 3 things. What do you think? And you have people coming in saying, yeah, I agree, they're all great things. You have other people coming in saying, well, my property's not set up for that. I can't do that. I don't need an EV charger. But it creates that debate. It creates that engagement. So I'm always looking for those stories where I can go into Facebook groups, or I can go online and go on our own channels and ask those questions. In terms of scheduling, I have done some scheduling, but I find that the scheduling stuff doesn't often work as well for various reasons, and I'm not really sure why.
Is it because it's not really fresh? It's kind of like it doesn't feel topical. It feels too much like pre-planned. It doesn't feel as organic. I don't know.
Do you know what? I think I've seen a lot of people's social media posts, obviously, because it's been my business for a long time now. And most of the time, I think you can tell. I think you can tell when something's been scheduled, especially when it's just a very simple photo or it's a simple link to a blog post. And you're right. Generally, the timing isn't great. It's not particularly topical. It's not getting involved in a conversation. It's not really starting a conversation. And I've seen a few people, seen some really good threads about this, actually, Twitter threads, people writing about, when to post and how they do it. And I saw one guy, he said, I tried doing scheduling for ages, and then I threw it on the fire and I started just posting when I had time.
Yeah.
And posting when I had time, I got way more engagement.
Yeah.
Even though it's not necessarily the 100% the right time.
Yeah.
It just found that organic stuff. And I try to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it tends, you don't always get it right. I mean, our audiences, about 60% of our audience is UK based, 20% is in the States, everybody else is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, and various countries across Europe. So you don't always get things perfectly right in terms of the timing. But I think I just have a gut feeling that when I do it more off the cuff, it gets better results.
Yeah. I think you're right. Do we want to say any more on social media? Have we covered that?
Social media, yeah, we could talk all day about social media, couldn't we? I mean, I think in terms of our business, in terms of Holiday Cottage Handbook, what I've found to be the most impactful channels have been LinkedIn and Facebook. LinkedIn was huge at the start in terms of growing a professional audience. I mean, I've kind of pivoted from somebody who was involved in a major sports event, and I was sharing stadium photos and, legacy projects and sustainability projects and, football related photos and me next to the World Cup and me going to the World Cup final and all this kind of stuff.
Hundreds of millions of people.
Actually, when I used to post, here's what, stadium construction photos were huge. I mean, I think some of the ones that I posted were getting hundreds of thousands of views on LinkedIn. And that's not from me having, like, at that time, I didn't have really that many followers and stuff, but people just love that kind of stuff. You know, like the anticipation of a major tournament. This is what stadium looks like. This is what Qatar's doing. Oh, wow, it looks amazing.
Building,
and especially from like people in Qatar and the region, because they had such pride at hosting the World Cup. So when they see this progress being made, you get a massive thing. But the point I was making is that I've pivoted from being involved in a major sports event, from a very like sports orientated audience, to short-term rentals. And I say like the majority of people now that follow me and that I engage with, they're all in this short-term rentals world, which means generally much lower engagement. I mean, I'm not getting hundreds of thousands of views on posts anymore, but where LinkedIn has been so valuable is A, growing that professional network, but B, helping me to connect with people that are going to help me to grow the business. And what I like about LinkedIn is that there's still room for organic growth on LinkedIn, and unlike some of the other, it's so difficult to grow organically now. But with LinkedIn, also with your business page as well, you can invite people every single month to follow your business page. So you can, as long as you're taking advantage of that, you've got 250 invites you can send every single month. And I do it religiously, and it helps get you that consistent growth, more eyeballs on what you're doing, building your ecosystem. And that's one, that's why, LinkedIn is so important. And then in terms of Facebook, why Facebook has been important is giving us a presence in a lot of Facebook groups, which is where a lot of the short-term rentals audience still is. Because, and this is for a couple of reasons. So the average person who owns a holiday let is probably about 60 years old on average. And where are people, if they're 60 years old and they're using social media, they're probably on Facebook. They're definitely not on TikTok.
No. Well, some are, but there's nobody under 30 on Facebook.
Yeah, so this is where this audience still is. So this is why Facebook has been so important in terms of, it's been difficult to grow. If you look at our LinkedIn, I think, we're over 1,500 people are following the Holiday Cottage Handbook page. On Facebook, it's less than 400. Even though we've had a lot of people viewing our posts on Facebook, thousands and thousands of views a week, a month, but converting them into people who are going to follow your page, incredibly difficult. But Facebook has been important because, like I say, a lot of groups are on there, and talking in those groups and getting in front of people has been so important. It's definitely helped to grow the business. So those are the two main platforms. Twitter's just a bit of a slog. The short-term rentals world is just not really there. Instagram, it's good to have a presence. It doesn't deliver huge numbers. And TikTok, I know very little about TikTok, but we're there and we occasionally post. And what I like about TikTok is that you can grow on it. I mean, they want you to grow on TikTok. Yeah,
they scale fast, don't they?
Yeah. Whereas, the other social media platforms these days,
very slow.
You got to pay.
Yeah.
You got to pay really to get in front of the audience. So that's where, maybe there's a bit of potential there with TikTok. And then, YouTube, we put video versions of our podcast on YouTube, but it's very much been like we're just going to put them here. We've got the library here. We haven't put much into actually growing that platform. And that's definitely something that we want to focus more on, especially like doing more shorts and that kind of thing. So but it's social media is interesting. And, the fact that, the algorithms are always changing, there's always new challenges to deal with. But like I said, I would definitely go back to like what we were talking about before, kind of doing stuff off the cuff, I think has worked better than too much planning.
Yeah. I mean, is there any scope? Do you do any materials where you're kind of media training your audience, for want of a better term? But I mean, these are business people to whatever degree, whether, they're renting out property space. There are things that you can teach that not all of them are going to be particularly media savvy or creative, or, so you could help their bottom line in those kind of areas, or it's not that kind of outside of your purview, really?
Well, actually, since I started Holiday Cottage Handbook, a number of companies in the industry have said, "Oh, we like what you're doing. Can you come and help us with content and that kind of thing?" And also with the production that we have. So this is what I say to a lot of the companies that we deal with, is that we have audio versions for the podcasts. You know, we talk about it in our newsletter. We have blog posts about it. We talk about it on social media. But we also have the YouTube version, and you can use that YouTube version to market your business. So if we've done like a 20, 30-minute interview and you've talked about your business and you've talked about tips and trends and how your solution can help people, put that on your website, use on your social media channels. It's something that can help to grow what you're doing.
Yeah.
And also the advantage of being part of our channel is that once you've recorded a podcast with us, you're part of our library. And as more and more people find us, and we see this every single week, they listen to one episode and then they start binging through all the others. You know, I had a lovely message from a lady last week saying, "Oh, I'm just getting into short-term rentals and I've somehow discovered this podcast, and you know, I've started binging through all the episodes. You know, thank you for doing this." And you know, and we can see through the figures that that's happening all the time, which is great. And so it's definitely another string to our bow.
Yeah, I mean, what marketer in the world wouldn't kill to get, like, you know, 30 minutes to 2 hours to 3 hours of someone's attention? Like, it's the most valuable thing that you can get, isn't it? Short of an actual phone call with the person, you're directly in someone's head talking about the things that you want to talk about.
Yeah, and do you know what? People love doing podcasts. And especially, you know, CEOs, founders. If you say, "Look, I want to do a podcast and I'd like you to come on and talk about yourself and how great you are and how great your company is," who's going to say no to that? And also the audience that I'm selling to, or the audience that I have, are people that might be customers for your company. I mean, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's a no-brainer to be involved with that. And but you know, it's it works both ways, because like I said, you know, earlier, I get to spend half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour with that person, and basically selling what we're doing and selling the idea, and hopefully bringing them on board as a supporter of the platform.
Yeah. So yeah, if I haven't said this enough on the podcast, like, do a podcast. It's good.
But it's the value, isn't it? Because I was listening to another podcast. In fact, it was one Phil in our WhatsApp group that he set up, and he highlighted the podcast that he'd been on.
The podcasters podcast.
The Podcasters podcast, and I listened to a couple of those episodes, and I want to go back and listen to a load
They're
more.
very good, yeah.
But yeah, they're excellent. And those guys were saying, you don't have to have millions and millions of downloads. You just have to have the right people listening. Yeah. Because there are podcasts out there, and if you've got 100 people listening, let's say, but they're potentially 100 customers and they're the right people and they're going to help grow your business, that becomes so valuable, incredibly valuable. And that's the beauty of podcasts. And they are, and it's just become so accessible, haven't they? You know, in terms of, I listen to them when I'm driving, when I'm walking my son around the village, when I'm, you know, whenever I've got a free moment and I can, whenever I'm like going on a walk, I really got into podcasts properly. Actually, this is probably as a result of the pandemic, and I started doing a lot of walking. I was getting my steps in every day. You know, when the pandemic started, I made a point of getting in 10,000 steps every day, and that's when I just started listening to podcasts all the time. And another good thing to come out of the pandemic. But yeah, they can be incredibly valuable, building your audience, building an ecosystem, and, you know, building that like loyalty and engagement, I think is a huge thing. And a lot of businesses will talk about having those 100 super fans, and probably the best way you can do that is not through a newsletter, is through a podcast. I think that's where the real super fans are. If they're listening to your podcast every week, they really like what you're doing.
Yep. So I'm going to move us on to the last two questions. So first question is the change question. So if you could change any three things about your work, you can be pragmatic or fantastic, however you want to do it. But yeah, you can change any three things about your work. What would you change?
Oh gosh, I would like probably to have some set time. I mean, I've got 3 kids and I kind of work on my business in between childcare. Mm-hmm. So the childcare and dealing with the family trumps most things. And then when I get a few hours here and there, usually after they've gone to bed. So after about 8:30, that's when I can spend a few hours doing stuff. So a bit more time would be nice. A bit more space as well. I'm in my spare room at the moment, so I'd like a bit more space. And I think eventually as well, I'd like to have the ability to kind of see more people and have a location where we can meet maybe once a week, once a month, and have that, that social interaction. And because even though I love remote working, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's great. Like I said before, we work with an editor who's based out in Spain, and that wouldn't have been even thought about, 10 years ago? I don't think really people would have thought about, I need an editor, or, people are using platforms like Fiverr or whatever it is now. These opportunities didn't really exist. So, but yeah, I think, having a little bit of interaction and getting together and sharing ideas and doing it face to face after you do most of your time remote, I think it has a lot of value. And I think if you spend maybe 90% of your time remote, that 10% of doing things face to face is really important. And that's one thing I noticed during the pandemic actually, is so we'd have, like with my team, we used to have calls every single morning. And then after a few months when we actually saw each other and got together, it was great.
Yeah. Why don't we do this more often?
Appreciate it. Yeah. Why don't we do this more often? And I think, yeah, I'd like to kind of get into that habit of, seeing people a bit more. But at the moment, life is, kids and family, and trying to grow the business at the same time. So it's kind of like snatched moments when I can record podcasts and work on newsletters and all the content and everything else. But yeah, we just make it work. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of any networking things in Leeds that are family friendly. There's what is it? Parents of small business or something. I'm sure there's one that's like a networking event that you can bring the kids to.
Okay, so it's like a networking crash.
Yeah, kind of, because there's like, but it's more.
It's a nice idea.
Yeah, more people working at home and stuff. It's kind of like, maybe there's a growing market for it. Just on that, before I move on to the UBI question, so would you be happy with a shed? Like, is that far enough a commute of like, I'm happy, I'm in a different place, I've got space.
Do you know what? Like the house that I'm living in now, I bought it just before I left Qatar, and I wish I'd have bought somewhere a bit bigger, because now we need a bigger place. And the houses that I'm looking on and Rightmove and everything, the ones that really catch my attention are the ones with an office or a bit of a garden shed. And I'm like, oh, that looks great. I can have my own space. I can set up my desk. I can arrange all the background really nicely for when I'm recording podcasts. That'd be perfect. And as much as I love, my 2-year-old flying up and bashing the laptop, having somewhere I can go and kind of get on with stuff quietly would be great. That would be really nice. But still, definitely having a bit more connection now and again would be nice. And that's why actually, there are a lot of events in the short-term rentals world, and we're going to be organising actually a lot more in 2025, and we've got a few more to go in 2024. So I am looking forward to those, because it's good to, they're great for growing the business, but also for meeting people and having that bit of normality and feeling like you're more part of a team again. It's it is important. But yeah, definitely that's certainly a goal. The next house I buy has got to have a nice work shed.
Yeah. And it's important, it's important to speak with colleagues, and it's important to talk shop, but it's also important just to talk about shit, just random nonsense.
Yeah, It is, isn't it? Yeah, just even like, I can remember, working back in Qatar, I used to sit next to a girl who's from the States, and she was a big baseball fan. And I went to one New York Mets game once when I was in New York.
Oh, I bet that was good.
I decided that I'd become a big baseball aficionado now. So we used to have all these ridiculous chats about baseball. Yeah, just like you say, ridiculous things like that can really help, and just I guess take your mind off work a little bit, and grow things socially, which is always great.
Yeah, and remember that there's stuff outside of work. It's not all just about work. It's a whole planet here of things and experiences, and
that's probably one of the slight issues with remote working, is that if you're not careful, you might not stop.
Yeah.
And this is also a little bit with having your own business as well. I was speaking to another guy in the short-term rentals world who he's the co-founder of a property management tech solution. And he was talking about the early days of running the business, and he said, it's so easy just not to stop. It's so easy just to always pick up your laptop, always be on your phone, always be just doing something. And you kind of have to, I think you have to kind of put notes in your diary or put times in your diary. Like I'm going to the gym today, or I haven't played golf much for the last year. I've played golf once in the last year, but now and again I'll try and go to the driving range or play golf, or just do something to go and do something else, get away from your laptop for a few hours. It's important.
Yeah. Go eat some food. Like people forget to eat and stuff. Oh, I'm exhausted. I've been working for 20 hours and I've not eaten anything. It's like, well, there you go. Go eat some food.
Exactly.
So, UBI, last question. So if there was a universal basic income, do you think that would affect your work at all? Are you familiar with the UBI? You've heard of it. You've worked in the media.
Interesting one, isn't it? I mean, how would it affect? I don't think it would affect me massively. If I'm honest, I'm the kind of person that I want to work. I want to grow things, develop things. I've got all sorts of ideas that I'd want to do business wise, and having a UBI, unless it's a crazy amount, which I don't think it's going to be, I don't think that would affect how I would work and how things would change. But it's a very interesting concept, isn't it? And I wonder how close we are to something like this. I mean, the pace of change is incredible. What's going to happen with AI? I mean, the potential of AI is just phenomenal. I mean, even since kind of like ChatGPT, which is probably the most common thing that people are going to be familiar with. But the way ChatGPT has developed since it started is amazing. And, the accuracy and, the amount of data it has at its fingertips in order to be able to respond to people is phenomenal. So, but I think what I'm most excited about in terms of AI is the potential it has to transform healthcare in the world, in terms of understanding, in terms of like preventing illness in people, basically. Knowing when we need intervention for people's health. I think that the potential it has in terms of like saving lives, keeping people healthier for longer is amazing. And to help the health service, which obviously needs drastic support. I mean, that's one thing I've noticed. I've been living in Qatar for 10 years, and when I left, I could get a GP appointment. When I left, I had a dentist. And now it takes 4 weeks to get a GP appointment. It's I call up a dentist and they say, well, you're going to have to wait 3 years.
That's pretty good. 3 years. I had 7 and 5 round here.
7 and 5, my goodness. I thought 3 was ridiculous, but yeah. So yeah, I think there's unbelievable potential. But yeah, I mean, I wonder, how long do you think we have until we have a universal income, do you think?
I don't think that the way that the discussion has, it's taken off in some circles, but like, I don't think it, because nobody knows, like, the amount of people that there are some people on the podcast, and this is a kind of skewed but random sample. But yeah, a lot of people never heard of it, and it's their first occurrence coming across it. And a lot of the time, it's kind of like, you know, I've had people see it as a very kind of communist thing, which has some truth and some background in, but then at the same time, then you look at the support that it's got in the US is a very technocratic, very libertarian, like not all of them, but some within some of those circles. So it's a weird one. And it resonates for me on two levels in that, like, firstly, it's a way of asking people, you know, if we took money out of the equation, how would that kind of change your work and your work experience, how you think about work? Ish. Not really, but that's kind of my thinking with it. And the other thing is to kind of promote the idea and sort of see how people respond to it. And also that thing of what I heard was the main objection that I would hear from people is like, oh, people just won't work. And it's like, but every single person I have asked, you know, okay, this isn't, you know, an academic research project, but like everyone I've asked on here, nobody said that they would just sit on their ass and not work. You know, like everyone's like, yeah, I'd work. Because it's like, and we know from the pandemic, like where loads of us were literally sat on our asses with nothing to do. It's not good for us. It doesn't do us any good.
Yeah,
it doesn't make us happy. It's not what we want to do.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, is this the future of the world? Is the future of the world people not working? Is that eventually where we're going to get to?
No, I don't think
Maybe.
so.
I don't know.
I don't think so, you see. So, which is, I would have said a completely different thing at the start of this project, but yeah, I can tell I'm talking to a journalist because you really got me, you've got me talking now. So yeah, I think that work is vitally important. It's as important as spirituality or any of these other cultural institutions that we have within the species. And it's not just like there are all these weird sort of separations and ways of thinking about work and labor and so on, but it's so integral to us. Like I conceptualized it kind of at the beginning of like, well, what's the very basic unit of work? What's the first thing when you do when you get up? Essentially, it's like breakfast. So it's finding that first meal. So that first piece of work is just, you know, to kind of nourish yourself for the day so that you can go on and kind of create more work, to find more food, to do more things, kind of thing. So I think I think how we talk about work will change, because it's a really impossible thing to define as well, because it's like, is work something you just get paid for? Is it toil? Does it have to be difficult? If you've got an easy job, like, are you really working? Like all of these things, like it's a really huge, complicated area, isn't it?
I feel like work will continue to exist. I mean, however, I can see a world in future where work is basically voluntary. You don't have to do it because technology will be so advanced that everything will be taken care of.
Mm.
You don't have to worry about earning money. But if you want to go and do something for your own benefit, and you want to, maybe the future of work becomes basically volunteering, and you're volunteering to help your family, your community, and you do it because it's important to have something to do, and it's important to contribute, and rather than earning money, because you don't have to earn money because everything's provided for. You've got a house, you've got, you know, your kids are going to have an education, you're going to have all the technology you might need, and work becomes this basically a huge picture of volunteering. That might be, I mean, I think maybe in years to come, I always think of like, you know, decades to come or centuries to come or thousands of years in the future, when people look back at us, what are they going to be baffled about? Are they going to be baffled that we actually worked every day? I mean, I'm sure there'll be, I think they're going to be simple things to be baffled about.
I think they're going to be baffled by the fact that we spent 40 years of the species' time ignoring the climate crisis. I think that's what they're going to be baffled about, if there is anyone there to see it. And I think like all of these conversations that we have about the future are kind of just pointless until we address that. And the sort of, yeah, I think we could do, like the abundance that you talk about, that like we could do that today. Okay, we couldn't politically and culturally, but like engineering wise, like we could deliver that. Like we can deliver that now if enough people wanted it, we could do that.
I mean, if you can conceive it, then it's doable, right? I mean, if you believe it, you can do it. And I mean, there are so many. I think you're right definitely on the climate. People will look back and say, well, hang on a minute. You had scientists for years telling you this is what's going to happen. And we can see it in the evidence. We can see it in all the metrics. This is very obvious.
Outside the window, it's peeing it down again.
Yeah, but even in our own lives, we've seen the climate change, and that's an incredibly tiny amount of time. It's so minuscule. It's not even a speck of dust. But we can see that there have been changes in the way, what our summers are like, what our winters are like, even in a few short decades. And there are going to be like very other things. I've had a conversation with a friend of mine a few times. I'm like, future generations are going to be absolutely baffled that people smoked. They're going to be absolutely baffled that people drank alcohol. I totally like, well, this is bad. Why would you do this? This is what I think. This is where we're headed. And maybe another part of that is people are going to be really baffled that we worked because we had everything we needed. It was there already.
So I'm going to stop us there in terms of this discussion, just for speed and so on. But I'll pick this up momentarily. Where can people find you? If you want to give us your socials, if there's anything else that you want to say, anything that you want to ask, feel free, but I'm conscious of the time as well. So yeah, if you need to get away, we can wrap it up here. But yeah, if you give everyone your socials, so where people can find you, if there's anything else that you want to discuss, feel free.
Yeah, sure. So my business socials, go to holidaycottagehandbook.com. That's the website. You'll find all the links to our social media channels on there. Me personally, I am active on LinkedIn. If you search for James Varley, Varley, you will find me. Tap in Holiday Cottage Handbook as well, and I'll definitely appear. And I'm on Twitter, probably more active on Twitter, talking about short-term rentals, Leeds United, politics, all sorts of things. Varley Media on Twitter.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James, for today and for your time. Is there anything else that you want to say before we sign off? I mean, 2 hours is a decent amount of time.
It's a marathon. Yeah. I get annoyed when one of my podcasts is over 45 minutes. I'm like, I've got to listen through all this again. But 2 hours, that's good going. Kudos to you.
Thank you again to James for being my guest. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. To work with James, you can find him at facebook.com/Holiday Cottage Handbook, linkedin.com/company/holiday-cottage-handbook, and youtube.com/Holiday Cottage Handbook. There's also an Instagram link in the show notes. If you'd like to speak to me about one of my guests or their interviews or what the hell I'm on about at any particular moment, or even about being a guest yourself, yes, you can do that. I shouldn't have to find all 1,000 guests myself. This is supposed to find its own guests to some extent, and the guests are also supposed to share their episodes. You can email working hours at workinghourspod@western-studios.com to discuss anything working hours. If you would like to make a podcast series, don't forget you can do that too, and support Working Hours by buying your podcast services from me, Western Studios Lead. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com to do that. Website and social links for that are in the credits of this episode. That's the bit at the end, long after you've stopped listening. I do already make a few shows for other people, but it would be good to pick up a few more. Okay, so remember, listener, no matter what you do, it's impossible for you to understand anything that your salary depends on you not understanding. Okay, that's me. Work for peace and plan with kindness. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either working hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with working hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loaners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.